Shavua Tov. The book of Deuteronomy contains a prophecy for the future where the Nochri, the non-Jew from far away, will come and see the destruction and the desolation of the land after all of the punishments. And I always felt that that non-Jew was Mark Twain, who came to the land of Israel in the 1860s, I believe it was, and recorded how desolate the land was. Well, in this week's reading, where we read about the leprosy, we have the Cohen, who is the one who diagnoses it and the one who will purify it. And I think we can put a name to an actual Cohen who dedicated his life to erasing this plague of leprosy, specifically Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen. Israel Meir the Cohen, also known as the Chafetz Chaim, the rabbi from Radin, Poland, from more than a century ago. From a century ago, actually. And he built a magnificent edifice. His book about Lashon Hara, evil speech, which is the cause of leprosy, which we will explore presently, is one of the most important books in the Jewish library, because guarding one's speech is such an important thing. It was so important that it even delayed the entry of the Jewish people into the land of Israel, because they had to fix that particular sin. We will dig into all of this. But first of all, it seems that it's a disease, but it is not a disease. The Torah describes a person getting different types of lesions on their skin, colorations, what happens to the hair, the size, and so forth. There's a treatment, a sort of a quarantine. The person has to go out of their house and out of their community and live in isolation for 7 days, and then the Kohen, the priest, comes to see them and will diagnose, is the person pure, impure, etc. It seems like a disease, but it is not a disease, because the Torah doesn't tell us about diseases. It doesn't give us diagnoses, and it doesn't give us cures. There are many diseases out there. You won't find any section of the Torah at all dealing with them. So why is leprosy different? Second of all, if it's a disease, well, then I would think that it indeed would be dealing with a diagnosis and a cure. Now, the diagnosis we have, but there's no cure given in the Torah. There's no medication or process that a person needs to go through in order to become healed. And also, most importantly, there's no doctor. It's a Kohen. A Kohen is a religious functionary, not a medical professional. So it's not a disease. Matter of fact, you might say, well, if that's the case, then why is there quarantine? Quarantine sounds like the sort of thing you do with a disease. But think about this. The law is that a person who is partially leprous indeed must go out of the camp for 7 days and have an evaluation, then another 7 days sometimes. But if somebody is completely leprous, in other words, the leprosy has spread and covers their entire being without a single spot of living flesh, then I would say that that person all the more so needs to be quarantined and kept away from society. But no, the rule is that such a person is actually pure and comes back to dwell among the rest of the people. That's not a disease. That's the exact opposite. And if you want to treat a disease, then the way we treat this leprosy is exactly upside down. You want the person who is ill to be resting, to be comfortable, to be encouraged in good spirits. You want people to go and visit them. It's one of the mitzvos, to visit the sick. But the leper, none of that. Would you imagine going into the hospital and saying to somebody there, listen, I want you to get better, so I'm going to kick you out of here. You're going to go take the bed. You live out in the field outside the town. Nobody's going to come and talk to you. You're going to be all by yourself. And every week the rabbi is going to come and give you a lecture. This is not the way that we treat a sick person. So it's not a disease. What is it? It is clearly a physical manifestation of a spiritual failing. And that spiritual failing, the rabbis are clear about it, is Lashon Hara, is evil speech. What exactly is evil speech? The Chafetz Chaim teaches us there are 3 categories of evil speech. One is called Motzi Shem Ra, which means literally slander. This we all get. Saying something bad about someone, that is false. Did you know that so-and-so cheats on his taxes, cheats on his wife, cheats on everything else that he does, and it just so happens that so-and-so is an upright citizen who doesn't do any of those things. Obviously, that is slander. All you need to do is to go on the website called X and see there are experts in slandering Israel and the Jewish people, but I digress. I'll go to the other extreme. The third category is called rechilut, or tale-bearing. This is an example of somebody telling someone that someone else spoke ill of them. Reuven says to Shimon, did you know that Levi said that you're a this, that, and the other thing? And the whole purpose of Reuven telling that to Shimon is to cause Shimon and Levi to have a fight. That's called tail-bearing or rachilut. The middle one is the one that is most misunderstood. It's Lashon Hara, the main category. And this is when you tell something about someone else that you happen to know is true, that it is a true fact. I saw the person go into the supermarket, into the makolet. I saw them take the Mars bar, put it in their pocket, and walk out without paying. Person stole from the makolet. That's Lashon Hara. And you might ask, but why is it Lashon Hara? It's true. Doesn't God want us to be honest and truthful? It's true, but it's not true. Because what happens is when I hear that the person stole the Mars bar, I get in my mind the image that that person is a thief and a dishonest person. And you know what? That's an exaggeration. They may have had a moment of weakness. Who doesn't? Everybody occasionally says things or does things that they regret. We have a mitzvah to give the benefit of the doubt, and the benefit of the doubt is that even if I saw the person commit the crime, if I know the person is a generally decent person, I must assume that they immediately regretted it and took corrective steps, which I did not see. So Lashon Hara is telling bad things about someone else that we know are true, and that is exactly forbidden because it creates a false impression that that person is an unworthy person, whereas it may just be one moment or one aspect that was amiss. So these are the things that are forbidden, and these are the things that bring about the plague of leprosy. And it almost says it out loud in the book of Deuteronomy. Not quite, but almost says it out loud. And before I go to that proof, let's just ask a simple question. Why doesn't the Torah simply say that this comes because of Lashon Hara? Let the Torah say, if a person speaks ill of someone else, and then God gives them leprosy, here is the procedure. So it doesn't do that. The Torah doesn't tell us that. I think that's because it would give an impression that for example, if a person spoke ill of someone else and didn't get leprosy, so then they would say, well, then the Torah is telling us a falsehood. And that's impossible. Or if they got leprosy and they're sure they didn't speak Lashon Hara, so they might be saying that, well, the Torah is being unfair. So therefore, to prevent that, the Torah doesn't say it out and out in black and white, but in the book of Deuteronomy, it almost does. What does it say over there? It says in the Parsha of Kiteitzei, Hishamer b'nega hatzarat. Be careful, beware of the plague of leprosy, to follow what the Cohen tells you to do. Rashi explains what is that prohibition or that requirement to stay away, to be careful of the plague of tzarat. It's telling us that a person shouldn't cut off the growth from their skin on their own to avoid becoming impure. In other words, they have to let the Kohen come, give the diagnosis, and follow the instructions to the letter. They cannot cut off or surgically remove the place of the leprosy when it is clear that this is a spiritual malady manifesting in a physical fashion. And the Torah then continues and says, the next verse, in the same section, remember what God did to Miriam on the way out of Egypt. Rashi says, well, you know what God did to Miriam? He gave her leprosy. Why? Because she spoke ill of her brother Moses. And so we see, says Rashi in black and white, this is the pshat, this is the explanation, that the reason why this tzaraat comes is because of Lashon Hara, and that's what the Torah is telling us there in Deuteronomy. Now let's just keep in mind how severe this is, because Miriam was not speaking ill of some rival or somebody who she didn't like. This was against her brother, whom she loved, whom she had saved his life, and whom she had the utmost respect for. She had a criticism of some decision that he made, whatever it was exactly. We don't know what she said, and we can't know what she said because it was bad speech, and the Torah is not going to write it, obviously. But we know the general content, the general topic. And so she was speaking ill of someone whom she loved very much, and she was speaking to her other brother, to Aaron, who also loved Moses. So this wasn't even so malicious. And even so, she was smitten by leprosy. So we see how strict and strong this is. So I say the following. Since it's not a disease, since it is a physical manifestation of a spiritual illness, there is actually a cure given in the Torah. And what is the cure? The cure is the Kohen himself. And as I mentioned, the Chofetz Chaim made this his life's work, to teach people about Lashon Hara, not to speak it. This is the Kohen who is purifying the plagues. And the story goes about the Chofetz Chaim. It's a famous story that a rabbi was in Florida, was giving a speech, telling a famous story about the Chofetz Chaim, that a student in his yeshiva was once caught smoking a cigarette on Shabbat. And the rabbi summoned the student to his office. And 2 minutes later, the student emerged from the office a complete Baal Teshuvah, completely repentant, and never did that again. And the rabbi speaking in Miami told this story, says, I only wish we could know what the Chofetz Chaim had said to that student in 2 minutes that achieved such an incredible result. At the end of the lecture, people filed out, and one elderly man stayed behind, came up and said to him, I'll tell you what the Chofetz Chaim said, because I was that student. He didn't say anything. He said one word. He took my hand in between his, and with tears rolling down his cheeks, he said, Shabbos, Shabbos. And the tear fell on my hand, and I can still feel the place where it burned into me, the intensity of what the Chofetz Chaim was saying to me. And I completely surrendered, and I repented. And I have been this way for the rest of my life. See, that's not a doctor, that's a Cohen. The Cohen is supposed to be the expert in Ahavat Yisrael, in love of Israel, in love of the fellow. And the Cohen understands that if a person speaks ill of someone else, it's probably because that person thinks ill of themselves. When the Torah says, love your neighbor as thyself, and Rabbi Akiva says this is the big rule, we can understand from here something significant. That if I don't love my neighbor, it's probably because I don't love myself. If I speak ill of my neighbor, it's probably because I think ill of myself. So therefore, we need to learn to love ourselves, and then we will be healed. And we need a Kohen who's like a Chofetz Chaim, filled with the love of God and the love of his fellow Israelites, and that will heal everything. And just to conclude how important this is, the Torah adds a detail about Miriam when it says, remember what happened, what God did to Miriam on the way out of Egypt. What does it mean on the way out of Egypt? Why is that a necessary factor? Because the Torah says when Miriam got her leprosy, the people did not travel for a whole week until Miriam returned to the camp. In other words, that fixing Lashon Hara, fixing this division was so important that the Israelites delayed their journey to the Holy Land by an entire week. Because if that doesn't get fixed, they can't go forward. This is the most important challenge in our time, to be careful about our speech, to love ourselves, to love our fellows, and never say a bad thing about anyone else. Certainly if it's false, not to tell people that someone else is smearing them, but even to say things that are true about someone, thinking that, oh, that's true, it can cause tremendous damage because that's not the true person. May there be peace amongst us and amongst all of the nations. Shavuot.